Okay, students, we're going to go over how to count sig figs and what a sig fig is in this presentation. So first off, what is a significant figure? Well, significant figures are always going to go back to the preciseness of the measuring device. It's telling us which numbers are important in communicating that measurement to us. Okay, when you're using a measuring device, we want to include all of the marked values on the measuring device plus an extra estimated digit. Okay, it doesn't matter what that estimated digit is, as long as your value goes to that specific decimal point, if there's a decimal point. When you look at this ruler over here, and we zoom in here, you can see that this line represents 4 and this line represents 5. So each little tick mark represents a tenth. So the measurement of the pin goes somewhere between these two tick marks. So we don't want to record our answer as 4.7 or 4.8. We want to reflect that that measurement is somewhere in between those two tick marks. So we can say that it's either 4.72 or 4.73 centimeters. Again, it doesn't matter what that last digit is, if you put the 2 or the 3, as long as you are putting that value, because that is showing that it's an estimated digit. When you look at this example here, we've got two different rulers, and we're taking the length of this cylinder. The top ruler has each little tick mark here represents an increase of a tenth. And this one down here represents just an increase of 1. So when we're estimating our extra digit, this one we're going to estimate to this position here, whereas this one can only estimate to the tenths place. Because you always want to go one digit past what each line on the measuring device represents. Okay, so this one, this value up here, this ruler, is a more precise measuring device because each line represents a smaller percentage or a smaller measurement. And so we can actually measure and record that to a more specific, more precise value. Sorry. Okay, so we've got two measuring devices here. When you're trying to read a measuring device and record it properly, you want to make sure you understand what each line represents. So over here on our graduated cylinder, each line represents an increase of 1, because here's our 40 and here's our 50. When you read a volume, you want to go from the bottom of the meniscus, so we're going to go right here. So if each line represents 1, we know that this is going to be 44 point something. Remember, you want to estimate and give me that extra digit. So we can say 44.8, you say 44.7, that's fine, because it doesn't matter what this last digit is as long as you are putting that digit. Over here, we have two thermometers. We're trying to record the temperature here. Thermometer A only has measurements of every 1 degree. So when we record our measurement, we can say that this is 21 point. We estimate one extra digit, so we could say 0.7. Down here, though, we have a little tick mark between each of these that represents an increase of a tenth. So when we say 21 point, we see that this line here goes down to like the 7. So we might estimate one extra digit and say 0.71, or we might put 0.70. The importance is that you put that extra digit indicating that this measuring device can give us a measurement to that value. So again, we've got our different rulers. We've got our different values on them, what each line represents. You're going to go ahead and record your measurements, estimating to an extra digit. So in ruler number 1, we would want to go to the tenths position because each line represents an increase of 1. So we would record this as maybe 2.8. If you put 2.7, that's okay. On ruler number 2, each line represents an increase of a tenth. So you can see here that this is just over that 7/10 mark. So we might say that this is 2.71. Here, every line represents an increase of 10. So when we estimate that extra digit, we can only go to one place to the right of the tens place. So that means we can only record this as maybe 28 or 27. You would not put a decimal point with this particular ruler because it doesn't go to that precise of a measuring. And then here in number 4, each little line represents an increase of 1. So we would go 1 digit past the ones position and we would have a value in the 10th place. Our beaker over here, each line only represents an increase of 10. So when you estimate 1 extra digit, 1 digit past the 10th place, that's the ones position. And so we would record our measurement as maybe 47 milliliters. Okay. So how do you count sig figs? Well, it really is going to depend on whether or not there is a decimal point present. And hopefully you saw that in the introduction activity. So if there is no decimal point, if the decimal point is absent, we're going to start counting from the right side of the number. We go to our first non-zero number. We start counting and we keep counting. So this 0 is not significant. That last 0 there is a placeholder. It is not significant to the measurement. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sig figs in this number here. If the decimal point is present, we start counting on the left side of the number. You go to your first non-zero from that side, you start counting and you keep counting. So we count all the way across. So this number would have 6 sig figs because this 0 here is not just a placeholder anymore. This 0 is telling us that our measuring device can record to that precise of a value. Okay, so the main thing is to figure out which side of your number to start counting from. You go to your first non-zero, you start counting, and you keep counting. So let's practice. These numbers all have decimal points. So if there is a decimal point present, we start from the left, we go to our first non-zero digit, and we start counting and keep counting. So here, we start here, start counting and keep counting. This one has 3 sig figs. In our second value, we go to our first non-zero, start counting, keep counting. So that has 4 sig figs. This one, go to our first non-zero number, start counting, keep counting. That has 5 sig figs. In our last value, you go to your first non-zero from the left side, start counting and keep counting. So this one has 4 sig figs. These leading zeros are not significant. Those leading zeros are placeholders. Erase this, and then we'll move on. So these numbers, these have no decimal points, which means we start counting on this side of the number. So we start on the right side, and as always, you go to your first non-zero number. That's where you start counting and keep counting. So this one is going to have 3 sig figs. We go to our first non-zero from the right side, start counting and keep counting. So this one only has 2 sig figs. In our third value, we go to our first non-zero number, start counting, keep counting. All of these numbers are significant, so that has 5 sig figs. And then in our last number, we go to our first non-zero, start counting, keep counting, and that has 3 sig figs. Okay? So here's a mix of practice. You want to make sure that you go start at the side you're supposed to start counting at. So on this first number, we go from the right, go to your first non-zero, start counting and keep counting. So this one is going to have 5 sig figs. In the second one, it has a decimal point. So we start counting on this side of the number. We start at our first non-zero, start counting and keep counting. So this one has 5 sig figs. Here we have a decimal point present. So we start counting on the left side of the number. You go to your first non-zero, start counting and keep counting. We've got 3 sig figs. Here, no decimal points. We're going to start on the right. We're going to go to our first non-zero. And that is only going to have 1 sig fig. The fourth example, there is a decimal point. So we're going to start counting from the left side, start at our first non-zero number, start counting, keep counting. So this has 5 sig figs and no decimal point number. We start on the right side. There are 2 sig figs on that one. Okay. And that is how you count sig figs. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know, because this is going to be very important for the duration of the course this year. Thanks. Bye.